My name is George Collier. Welcome to the ERP Perspective, the show where we look to empower, educate, and unleash the perspective of different ERP industry leaders. Today, we have a great industry analyst. He's helped over 200 digital transformation projects. He's helped rescue over 50 digital transformation projects and helped businesses save over $100 million in net savings. There's not much more of an introduction that I can do for this industry leader, as he's very popular on LinkedIn. I'll hand it over to the one and only Sam Gupta. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. And thank you so much for having me, George. I am a big fan of your content and the show. I mean, it has the new energy, young energy that is not very prevalent these days, I guess, in the ERP industry because it's becoming same old, same old. So thank you so much for bringing this show to us.
No problem at all. I mean, you've been a massive help to me in my education around enterprise resource planning. I know we've known each other for some time, and yeah, I love your content as well. We're always on LinkedIn sharing new ideas and making it fun for the community. Because I think we both agree you learn a lot better when the education's fun and engaging, and you can identify with it. But yeah, first of all, it'd be great to hear more or share with the community more about sort of your journey in a little bit more detail and your position with ElevatIQ.
Yeah, happy to. So I'll keep it short. Otherwise, I may spend the whole hour just describing me. And I think that that's going to get boring, right? So roughly 20 years in the industry, and I think you covered a lot of different points, primarily focusing on ERP and digital transformation industry. I started with some of the, bigger SIs. That was my background, dealing with very large sort of implementations. And then roughly 8 years back now, eight probably, we started Elevate IQ. The focus has been more independence, I would say, running this more in the vendor agnostic manner. So we focus on change management, digital transformation and strategy, any sort of system selection, and that is going to be across many different categories, which is your CRM, ERP, and these are just the broader categories. There are many different other categories that are there in the market. So we cover all of them. We do a lot of research, publish our content, and then do our engagements as well. In terms of training, I guess I'm engineer by training, and then I also have business degree. So that's about me, I guess, George.
That's fantastic. So I know we were discussing potential topics and what's relevant in the community at the moment, and I know we were talking around the big debate between sort of ERP versus best of breed models. Is simplicity better, or is a specialized approach better for your business? Because yeah, there's a lot of benefits, pros and cons to each approach. But for there's no one better to sit down with and discuss this topic in sort of more detail. So I mean, what sort of prompted you to have that discussion, and what are you seeing in the market at the moment?
Yeah, so honestly speaking, when we started doing this, my personal background was slightly broad, I would say, compared to other ERP consultants. My background was doing the whole enterprise architecture, doing sort of digital transformation engagements, which is going to have a lot of different categories, a lot of different, accounting firms that we have in the market. They do very similar work as us, and their perspective is going to be very narrow in terms of ERP. And there was a time when you could sort of shove everything inside the ERP, but things changed a little bit, right? And now you need to have sort of the broader perspective again, depending upon the system category, depending upon the user expectations. Now with AI, this is going to be even more challenging. How many different apps are you going to have? Yes, the consolidation matters. Some people argue that, ERP is no longer relevant in the world of composability or in the world of AI, but that is not true at all. Consolidation is sort of the business transformation topic, I would say. When you have to grow, there comes a point in the company's life cycle when you have to consolidate some of the processes, but when you consolidate, you sort of lose the speed. So there is always going to be a little bit of balancing act in terms of how much do you want to consolidate and how much do you want to keep siloed. And that's where understanding of these enterprise software categories and debate about the best of breed versus ERP is always relevant. So from my perspective, I guess how I got into this topic, because whenever we were doing any sort of engagements, the average number of systems that we have in any given engagement were roughly 30. And obviously when you have 30, you have 30 different data silos as well, right? Now, can you make it one? Probably not. That's not the best idea, I guess. In some cases, you could, but you want to keep maybe 4 or 5, as few as possible, but you don't want to make it too few because, again, you are sort of going to shove everything inside one system. And some teams don't appreciate they don't need to be consolidated. There has to be a reason why consolidation is required. So that's going to be my perspective, I guess, in terms of best of breed versus the ERP.
Yeah. I mean, people get very passionate about the topic and very opinionated, but in a good way. Obviously, people have their own structures, their own experiences. What do you think is the reason that sort of the divide is so sort of sharp? Let's say that people are so passionate about either having that simple approach or being open or open-minded to having a more customized setup.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And I am going to probe a little bit into your background, George. And I think that's relevant for this conversation. So, right, you are a recruiter and your job is to find the right skill set for the right job. Now, if I asked you a question that, okay, I am looking for somebody called digital transformation consultant. And if you are going to ask people, okay, they are going to tell you that, what the hell is digital transformation consultant? There's nothing called digital transformation consultant. Okay. Either you are going to have something like, if you are, let's say, recruiting an SAP, then they are going to say you are going to have somebody like maybe SAP MM consultant, SAP PP consultant, right? Or PM consultant or whatever, acronym that you want to choose there. Or you are going to have FICU consultant. When you are going to come to mid-market, you are probably going to have functional consultant and a technical consultant, right? So now when you look at all of these skill sets, everybody is going to have background that is going to be so deep in a very specific skill set or a domain, right? So now when you ask for the expertise of these different consultants that we have in the market, how many of them are going to have the expertise across ERP plus enterprise architecture plus CRM plus I don't know how many different categories that we have in the market? It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And that's why we have so much problem, right? When you ask any of the ERP consultants, okay, what is your philosophy of digital transformation? Obviously, they are going to mention this more from the ERP perspective. When you talk to a CRM guy, he's going to have his own perspective in terms of what matters more. If you ask a WMS supply chain guy, they are going to have their own sort of perspective. If you look at the sort of the executive ranks, executives have their own sort of journeys in how they evolved, right? On an average, if you ask any executives, they are probably going to have maybe 4 implementation, maybe 5, not more than that, right? If you ask practitioners, they are probably going to have maybe 10, 20, sometimes 50, sometimes 100, depending upon how deep you are involved in those engagements. So, right? So this journey actually shapes the conversations around this, right? So when you talk about best of breed, which consultants are you going to find which are going to have real deep expertise into best of breed plus ERP? They don't exist.
Yeah.
Okay, you are going to have very few people who have done all of this, and generally they are going to have the enterprise. They are going to be probably enterprise architect or maybe business transformation consultants. Very similar profile as me. But then when you talk to a lot of different enterprise architects as well, the challenge that they are going to have is they are going to be too deep into technology. So they are not necessarily either going to have the business degree or the business background. So again, that's where the real problem is. The people who grew up in the ERP community, their focus is going to be ERP, ERP, ERP. They sort of don't understand the real best of breed concept. And then you have sort of the enterprise architects, who are going to be very deep into technology, but they are not going to have as much background into business processes, business transformation, etc. So that's why you have so much divide and so much noise in the market. Everybody's talking about what they, understood and how they sort of grew up. You are not going to find one central theme or a person who understand everything. And that's why we have so much noise in the market.
Yeah. No, yeah, I 100% agree with you. I mean, I know from the start as well, you mentioned the business side, and it all depends on sort of the business life cycle and things like that. So from like a business perspective and not sort of a technical approach as you mentioned, what are the sort of real economic trade-offs between sort of an all-in-one ERP suite and a best of breed approach, and how should leaders think about not just the cost but the speed and also the scalability of that?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. And I like to talk about the financial inflection points. And how the financial inflection points works is, and they are going to be roughly at $10 million, $25 million, $100 million, $250 million, $1 billion, then $5 billion and above, I guess, right? So each of these inflection points are going to have very specific characteristic, and you need to make material changes to your business processes, business model, and if you don't do that, generally in the marketing terms, in the financial terms, there is a term called crossing the chasm. And I don't know if you have heard of that or not. Companies generally cannot get over that hump and they struggle to grow past that point. Either their financial margins are going to suffer, or they are going to have some sort of operational efficiency issues, or they will just not be able to grow. And because of that, what is going to happen is another management or the ownership is going to come in and they are going to take over that company. Generally, when you are roughly $10 to $25 million, you are going to have somebody like private equity involved. When private equity gets involved, again, their goal is going to be to make material changes. And one of the material change that they make, roughly around $30 million to $50 million, is going to be consolidation of some sort of processes. And if they are not going to consolidate, it's going to become much harder. $30 to $50 million point is probably the ideal point in general. And the reason for that is because, before that, you just cannot afford to have the IT spend. Okay. Some companies try to do that, but they sort of struggle or fail. And that's why you have a lot more failures in general in the industry. Now, if you don't consolidate, it's very hard to go from your 50 to it's just hard. Okay. And once you are, let's say, $1 billion company or $500 million company, you cannot go as consolidated, because moving together is very hard, to be completely honest, because you just have too many personalities, too many people, too many department, too many philosophies. So playing as a team becomes hard as well. And that's why you will see the way these systems are positioned in the market. After that point, also, they sort of take the best of breed architecture. Now, you spoke about economics, right? Best of breed architecture in general is going to be far more expensive than the consolidated architecture, because in the consolidated architecture, you are dealing with just one data store, one database. Everything is easy when you are dealing with just one box, one sort of boundary. Okay. As soon as you are going to introduce one more boundary, your life is going to be challenging in terms of reconciliation, in terms of, how you are going to house all of these workflows between your ERP and CRM. And people sort of have these buzzwords that they like to believe in. Hey, give me like seamless integration. Well, give me the best systems, right? Give me the best architecture. It doesn't work that way, right? All of these things are going to be aligned to a specific state, aligned to a specific outcome, objective that you are trying to accomplish. And based on that, you have to create your processes. You have to house your processes. You have to create your interaction models. And there are going to be some of the scientific concepts as well that are involved in this, which is going to be your master data governance, etc. So the journey that I mentioned, that journey sort of drives, how much consolidation you want to have in your processes versus best of breed. But one of the things that your listeners should know, that best of breed is always going to be expensive if you are trying to integrate. Okay. Best of breed may be cheaper. And that's why roughly at around, $10 million or below, you are going to have a lot of best of breed. And best of breed, when I say, that's going to be SaaS systems. You will see companies using maybe 30, 50 different SaaS systems, but they don't try to integrate. Okay. If they try to integrate those, and sometimes integration may be easier when you don't have the formalized data model underneath those systems. Meaning, for example, let's say if you say QuickBooks or Xero, they are very file-based systems. They don't necessarily have any sort of traffic tools. So integration becomes easier, and people's expectation when they go from, this point to the next, their expectation is going to be, can I get similar experience? But they miss the point that they don't have the data integrity. They don't have the data tightness. So even though you have some sort of integrated experience, but that experience is going to be very different from your ERP. So these are some of the drivers that sort of drive whether you want to go for consolidated architecture or you want to go for best of breed.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of business owners and people looking to potentially go into this model, it's also like the return on investment. As you mentioned, it might be, more expensive to integrate it. But, do you, I mean, it's all different sort of business cases, but do you think that return on investment will become apparent, in sort of the mid to long term for the business?
So let me ask a clarifying question there so that I am able to follow along. So here, are you looking for more of the ROI or from the investment perspective, or what would be your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going into sort of the company's sort of investor expectations and sort of what the return on an investment would look like by approaching that best of breed model?
Yeah, so I guess from the investment perspective, there are two different layers, right? Let me touch on that. So one is, are you looking for the investment from the software vendor perspective? That's one, okay? Because that drives the R&D spend and how you want to define your architecture. That is going to define, okay, how many features are going to be developed, in a given category, whether that is going to be aligned to your expectation or not. And then you are going to have your own investment as a customer if you're looking at this more from the customer lenses, where you are trying to do some sort of digital transformation and you are buying these capabilities, you are buying the software from the vendors, right? So these two are two different perspectives. The R&D perspective drives how the market is going to move, and that market is going to drive different categories. Today, let's say you call something ERP, tomorrow that may not be called ERP, right? Because depending upon what they are able to sell, and generally that's what drives how these categories are developed, because market dictates that, right? It's not about just one particular vendor. It's going to be the overarching industry, how these classifications are done. In some cases, the analysts play a major role in that, because they are sort of trying to forecast how the market is going to move, and based on that, the functionality and features are going to be developed. Now, coming back to the real investment from the user or from the client perspective, now they need to align their investment. So for example, whenever they are undertaking any sort of initiatives, if they are taking ERP, they need to make sure their expectation of ERP is going to be aligned with how market defines it. And if that is going to deviate, then what is going to happen is you are going to get into these custom development, custom integration scenarios. And that's where you hear noise in the market that, there's a lot of failure. There's a lot of failure because these customers don't necessarily understand what ERP is supposed to mean or what ERP is supposed to do, how that ERP is supposed to fit into your enterprise architecture. So from the investment perspective, again, if you're aligning everything, you are sort of going to get the ROI. From the end customer perspective, if you're not aligning, then obviously you are going to get into a lot of issues there.
I mean, that alignment's sort of key to understand which approach is best for the business. I mean, in sort of R&D heavy organizations, how do they sort of understand, in good detail, or be confident in the decision if sort of a simple approach on ERP or best of breed model makes more sense? What would sort of your advice be to them businesses sort of sitting down and thinking which avenue should we go down?
Yeah, so I guess, that's going to be a decision that you have to make based on what you are trying to accomplish as a business and where you are trying to go to, right? So that's going to be the to-be model design from the business process perspective. What are your core challenges right now? What are the pain points? Are those pain points because you have too many data silos, and because of those data silos you have inefficiencies, because the only thing people are doing when you have these too many data silos is they are moving data from one system to the next manually. Some people, that's their day job, right? They are simply entering data, sales order from one system to the next, purchase order from one system to the next. Then once you do that, then they are doing a little bit of validation, they are doing verification, etc. So a lot of people are doing just that, some sort of firefighting, just the data entry. Now, that is obviously not the business value add for your business, right? So how do you remove that? And again, it's not about removing any specific skill set or people. It's about really augmenting those workflows and making sure you are doing value add activity that is going to have the real business value for your business. So that's where your consolidation use case is going to be that, okay, when you design the to-be model, okay, you need to figure out, okay, how much do you want to consolidate? But that consolidation also is going to have implications. So some of those implications are going to be that, okay, now your teams are going to move slower. So let's say before this architecture, for the same data entry, if let's say you took 1 minute, now you might take 2.5 minutes. Can you believe this? Okay. And the reason for that is because you are trying to satisfy a lot more dependencies in your transactions. You are trying to collaborate. You are trying to move as a team as opposed to moving individually, right? So again, these are key business decisions that you have to make depending upon your business model. So depending upon how many different process silos you have, how many different data silos you have, and that will dictate which enterprise software categories that you want to utilize. So when you talk about consolidation, consolidation generally means, okay, you are using some sort of ERP, but ERP is not always the answer for every single industry. If you go to manufacturing, distribution, industrial distribution, in these industries, they require a lot more consolidated processes. And the reason why they require that is because they need to run connected processes, which is going to be your MRP sort of workload. If you are going to run any sort of ATP centric processes, you are going to require a lot more consolidated, processes, consolidated data. But that is not necessarily true for businesses like you or me. We don't need all of that. Okay, sometimes we need consolidation, but that consolidation also fires back at times. That's why when you look at service-centric industries, when you go to not-for-profit, when you go to, they also have a little bit of ERP exposure. You go to public sector, they are not going to have as much ERP footprint in the enterprise architecture. They are going to have a lot more systems, right? When you go to companies in retail does not have as much ERP footprint. So again, depending upon the industry, depending upon the architecture, depending upon what you're trying to accomplish, from the vision perspective is going to dictate whether you are going to have the best of breed. But before you look at the system, define your business processes in terms of what you are trying to accomplish. Design your enterprise architecture, which is going to be, after combining all of these different categories and how they are going to interplay with each other. And that is what dictates whether you are going to have ERP or best of breed, or how many different systems you are going to have in the architecture.
That was explained really, really well. And in terms of the integration cost, I know it was mentioned earlier. It's going to be expensive, and it's a cost not everyone sort of highlights. And it sometimes it sounds easier than it's actually done on the integration part. But what are the biggest challenges companies are facing when it's connecting that multiple best of breed systems, and how does that sort of compare to the sort of lock-in or risk of a potential single ERP system?
Yeah, so I mean, people underestimate the work required with integration, right? So integration is probably a very similar task as your custom development or development. And the only reason why you are buying enterprise software, ERP, CRM, whatever category you are buying because you don't want to develop it yourself, because development is expensive. Now, when you look at the integration workflows, people sort of, and again, when you look at the sales and marketing material, they always are going to describe, hey, don't worry about it. Everything integrates, no problem here. You don't need to put any sort of effort. But when you look at the integration models of these systems, they are designed from a very specific perspective. Okay, very specific state, and that state is not going to be aligned to your needs. Okay, so you need to align that. Now, how do you align that, right? So you need to define again your process workflows. You need to look at your data, how your data is set up at this point of time, and how much deviation are you going to have from the model that was supposed when they built that integration. So pre-baked integration, pre-baked software, they are kind of a model, a pre-baked model that you are buying. They are going to have some sort of inputs and outputs from that model, right? So now if your inputs and outputs are aligned to that, it's going to work. And if they are not aligned, it's not going to work. In 90% of the cases, they are never aligned. Okay, and then you are going to have the licensing constraints as well that you have to satisfy for the integration to work. So what is the process? The process is going to be like your software development, where you need to define your business processes. You need to map out all of your integration. You need to look at your hierarchy, the way your data is set up versus the way the data is set up in the pre-baked integration. And if you need to develop custom, you still have to look at the platform, how those are set up. So this is a very, very, very involved exercise. By the way, right now we are talking about connecting two systems. We are not talking about third system, because when you introduce a third data model or third system, the probability is going to be, exponential in that case, right? So you are adding a lot more variables, but that is going to increase the complexity, because now you have to figure out the reconciliation workflow across all of the system, because you are not necessarily just looking for the integration between A to B or A to C, you are also looking at B to C, right? So you have to figure out all of those, permutations and combinations. You have to look at, okay, what is going to be source of authority for each of those data sets. So for example, let's say when you are going to interact with your CRM plus ERP, in those cases, you are simply integrating maybe customer data, maybe sales and marketing. You are not integrating more than that, right? But when you are going to introduce something like, let's say, P2P, in P2P, you are also integrating vendor, but there might be some overlap. For example, inventory may be shared across all of these different systems. So you need to define, okay, which is the source of authority and how that inventory is going to be augmented, how that is going to be used when users are going to enter data, what are going to be implications and all of that. Look at the amount of work and the analysis that is required in this work. And then only you can define the integration model. And this is what makes it expensive. And people don't realize when they are going to have 30 different systems, they are going to have their custom processes. They have no idea how much work this is going to require. And sometimes, they sort of over assume that they can replicate the same behavior as ERP and they have no idea what they are getting into, to be completely honest. Okay, when you are trying to create, even if you are going to buy an enterprise software category and you are trying to mimic the behavior of ERP using integration layer, that's a nightmare.
Yeah.
That's a nightmare from the get-go. So this is the kind of exercise that we are talking about from the integration perspective. It's a very difficult, and that's why I'm saying best of breed is always going to require the most amount of work, the composable architecture. People talk a lot. Okay, they feel that it's some sort of magic wand that they can wave. They have no idea how much money they are going to need, how much effort they are going to need. So if you can afford, if you are Fortune 100 and you are trying to mimic some sort of customer experience that you can justify based on the billions and billions of dollars that you are going to invest in this integration, sure, go for it. But if you are a $30 million company, you don't even have that revenue. So how are you going to do that?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you've got the finances behind you and you've got a well-structured plan and sort of, gone through multiple different scenarios, then it might be the solution for your business. I mean, in terms of, people who are in favor of ERP vendors and that sort of one ERP solution, and they argue that they get more stability, and then a best of breed sort of vendor might say that they offer sort of innovation and sort of some more flexibility. I mean, the two questions, which I know they might be hard to answer, but who's right? And how does the business balance agility without sort of creating chaos?
Yeah, so nobody is right in that case because you are talking to sales and marketing people, to be completely honest, and they don't know a lot. Okay, the problem is they just don't know what they don't know. When you talk to the real implementation guy, they do not talk like that. They don't use words such as innovation. Again, innovation does not have much of the meaning, to be completely honest. Unless we are talking about a specific innovation that is going to add some sort of business value to your business, then, innovation makes sense. But innovation, if you talk to a CFO, they might not necessarily care for innovation. Sure, you want to be ahead in the market, you want to utilize AI, but as long as you can justify the business value again, right? So in those conversations, I don't think anybody is right. So what you need to do in those cases is when you hear the pitches such as this is that, again, define your business model, define your business processes, define your enterprise architecture, and then figure out which system category is going to meet your need. ERP could be the answer, best of breed could be the answer, depending upon what you are trying to accomplish, how much budget you have, what you care for the most. But unless you define those objectives, 90% of these people, okay, who are doing these projects, who fall for these pitches, if you ask them, okay, just write me simple 5 objectives for this project, can you write that? Okay, when you ask them to write, you are never going to get the objective that are going to be technically and financially feasible. They are not going to be realistic, right? We generally follow something called SMART. I'm pretty sure you are familiar with that framework to define the objectives, right? So S is going to be specific, M is going to be measurable, A is going to be attainable, R is going to be realistic, and T is timely. That's the SMART framework, right? So whenever you want to define any sort of goals, we ask, this is the first exercise that we do with every single customer, George. Okay. And when we ask them, okay, give me something, we get some vague dreams, some sort of, wish list. You cannot implement that. Nobody can work on that, to be completely honest. So the first thing that we need to do is, okay, I'm going to teach you how to rewrite your goals, how to rewrite your business requirements. And that is the first foundation before you get to any sort of complex topics, which is going to be ERP versus best of breed. That's probably, PSG. But we need to first cover the grade A or grade 1, I guess, not A. In this case that, okay, you are going to go through these things first. Learn how to write the objectives, because that is the foundation of any project, because before you make any sort of major decisions for your technology. Once you do that, then the next phase is going to be, okay, define your needs. Okay, you really need to follow smart framework when you are trying to define needs, and then you are going to obviously define the data layer in terms of how that is going to work, and then finally enterprise architecture. And again, if you don't know how to write your objectives, you are probably not qualified to work on enterprise architecture. Okay, that's where you need to hire experts who are doing this on a daily basis, because again, this does require expertise. It takes a lot of years before somebody can master these concepts. And a lot of consultants that we have in the market, they sort of fake their expertise. They don't necessarily have that. So again, you need to either have master, or you need to have that expertise yourself. So once you have that, then only you can sort of ascertain whether this is going to work or not.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And I know you mentioned that sort of after sort of the technology piece, it's also the people and sort of the culture and leadership sort of behind that, and the mindset to make either sort of model work. I mean, what do you think the type of cultural leadership needs to be like to successfully implement either one of these models?
Yeah, so honestly speaking, if you are going to have cultural issues, in 90% of the cases, and again, we call these as man-made problems.
Mm.
Okay. And the reason why we call these as man-made is because they are not necessarily there, but you are creating because you don't want to change. And these are all change management topics, right? So some examples of man-made problems would be that, as the ERP consultant, I am recommending that, okay, you probably need to align this architecture, or you need to change your data set, or you need to change your SKUs, okay? Or the way you are constructing your SKU modeling, you need to change that, right? Now, the company or the executives are going to argue that, what, we cannot change because of whatever reason. Maybe we have done the business this way, and that's why we are not willing to change that, right? Sometimes some executives are going to agree, but the other executives are not going to agree. So there is some sort of misalignment. So when you have any sort of man-made problems, that makes your project 10x more complex. Okay, if you have the executive team aligned, you don't have any sort of cultural issues, then your implementation is going to be far more predictable. You have much higher chances of success. In these scenarios, if you have this situation, I would guarantee this, okay? Do not attempt best of breed architecture. It's only going to get 10x more expensive, because these guys have no clue when they don't change these things. That makes your implementation x more expensive. Okay. And sometimes what people feel that, hey, my business is unique. My business processes are unique. And because of that, I'm not going to go for ERP. I'm going to go for best of breed architecture, because I'm going to get a little bit of flexibility. But what they miss in that point is that the problem is not necessarily ERP. The problem is their business processes. And those business processes are not changing because people are not willing to change. And I'm pretty sure they have tried this before. Executives have tried this before. Maybe they hired some consultants. It's not that, it's going to be their first ERP project for any company, I guess, right? They have tried this in the past, but it did not work for them. And in most cases, these are all going to be man-made issues. They are all related to change management, to the skill set. And again, the only reason is because we have so much noise in the market. People sort of fake their, expertise. They just don't have that. And sometimes it's very hard to argue with that, especially if you are going to be a customer who's paying the bills. Then it becomes very hard for consultants as well to overcome that barrier, right? So they are simply going to follow the order and do whatever they can in their power. And because of that, there are a lot of implementation challenges. So again, in 90% of the cases, you are going to have some sort of man-made issues. And when you have that, best of breed composable architecture is going to be extremely, extremely challenging to implement.
Yeah. So I know the two main points for anyone sort of potentially thinking about going down that best of breed route is, you need to consider, are you sort of cash heavy or got enough money to be able to do it
that nobody has.
Yeah, yeah. ERP projects are expensive as they are, but never mind if you're going down a best of breed model. So obviously cash heavy, sort of has the money to be able to do it. It has very limited sort of man-made problems. Things are running smoothly. If things are in chaos already, you don't want to be adding more chaos trying to go down this route. Is there anything else that you'd add to someone thinking around potentially going down that model, or considerations a business needs to think about?
Yeah. So what I would say is, if you want easy life, you probably need to go for ERP. And if you're limited on budget, if you're limited on expertise, and again, depending upon the industry, right? ERP always is going to be the cheapest if you are trying to consolidate your processes. If your goal is some sort of consolidation, then ERP is probably the right answer. But let's say you have desire to do something different, and you have reasons why you cannot go for ERP, and you don't care how much that is going to cost, then you can go for best of breed. But again, best of breed always is going to be expensive, as I said. So think about that before you commit for this investment. If you don't have that freedom, if you don't have expertise, if you don't have IT maturity internally, we will always say that ERP is always going to be the cheapest, but obviously it depends upon the industry as well.
So, and towards the end of these episodes, we always like to let the audience go away with some sort of advice or something to think about. I know it's always hard to predict the future, but the last two questions are sort of based on sort of future topics. But if you had to sort of make a bold prediction, does the future belong to sort of a unified ERP suite, or a sort of composable best of breed ecosystem? And what advice would you give to a CEO sort of making that decision today?
Yeah, so when we are talking about prediction, I think I have to throw in the buzzword there called AI, because there would not be an episode that can be done without AI. And I don't think I had mentioned that, right? So again, with AI capabilities, things are going to change substantially in terms of these categories, the way their interaction models are going to be. So if you are exploring any sort of AI initiative, obviously vendors are arguing that they are going to have 24-hour go live or whatever. That doesn't mean anything, to be completely honest. Okay, so fundamentals have not changed, even if your technology is going to be superior. So if you are exploring any sort of AI initiatives, your chances of failure are probably going to be equal. So be super diligent when you are exploring AI composable or whatever technologies out there. Yes, the technology is going to be improved, but overall, in terms of effort, in terms of planning, in terms of strategy, your effort is going to be very similar. So do not underestimate that, and put some thinking behind that before you start on these initiatives.
That's great. I mean, yeah, thank you again for obviously coming on to this episode of ERP versus the best of breed approach. We've covered so much in this episode already, but yeah, that was all the questions that I had for you today. But is there anything else that you'd like to final message to the community, or anything like that before we round up the episode?
No, I mean, this community is great, and I think you are never going to find a better time to be in the ERP industry. George knows this, right? I mean, he's crushing it with his content. We have seen content from I don't know how many different people. Things are really exciting. So either you are part of the ERP community, connect with everybody who's going to be part of the community. I think this is wonderful.
People that are watching, feel free to follow Sam Gupta and ElevatIQ, and with their great sort of advisory services. And yeah, this has been the ERP Perspective, and thank you for listening.